Look really natty. Yeah, that's good, you know. That's really so good to see you, Jeff.
Same here, Howard.
And look forward to being down there at the church on the 13th. When Lynn's going to be there. That's
April 13th.
Boy, you got good company in Lynn Stewart.
I'm very excited that she's going to be the
And I think you have a whole legion of people who your shoulders you're standing on, like Bertrand Russell and William Kunstler and a lot of other people, and a number of those in the audience to whom I welcome to the program. Welcome very much. The guest today is Geoffrey Blank. He's the founder. Is the founder and the president of the No Police State Coalition, and he's into some hot water now, as it were, with the system. We're going to want to talk about that. He's had an altercation with the authorities, and we're going to be talking about that and letting you know about some of the things that are coming up in the time immediately ahead. And Geoffrey, welcome very much. It's so good to see you again. Done programs in the past.
I just want to correct, I didn't have an altercation with the system, and the system had an altercation with me. I was just minding my business, speaking out against the war and George Bush, saying that the war wasn't about spreading freedom and democracy. It was about spreading ExxonMobil's control and to benefit Wall Street. And the police came and arrested me. So I wouldn't say that I had an altercation. The system had an altercation with me.
Well, that's what comes first, the chicken or the egg or the horse or the cart or the elephant in the tail? I don't know, that kind of thing, because it'll be that way. That's the thing that's going to be seen. And that you're part of a thing called, and you say on the literature and so forth, that you were arrested for speaking out against the war.
Correct.
And then also for speaking out against U.S. imperialism.
Correct.
A lot of people think imperialism is a loaded word, you know, a thing like that, and so forth. But these kind of things, and we're going to talk about all this, put it in a context and so forth. What do we mean by police state? I mean, you know, that kind of thing. But please, as you've done before, we've had programs with you. You're a really interesting fellow. And let's wade into this a little bit, your situation, by sharing your background for people who haven't seen past programs and so forth, please. Education, that sort of
32 years old. I'm currently enrolled at Brooklyn College in the master's degree program for sociology. Grew up in Brooklyn, raised in Brooklyn. I've been living in Rockaway Park, right on the beach, for the past 8 years. Been working as a lifeguard at the beach for the past 10 years.
Rockaway's right on the, like near Jones Beach or something? Or?
No, it's the southern part of New York City. The A train goes there.
Nice. The A train goes right there, right? Okay. Nice part of the world, I guess. Really.
Beautiful part of the world.
Yeah, and the water is good to swim and all that stuff.
The only drawback is it's a schlep to get into the city.
It is.
It's
How long does it take you to get in?
At minimum an hour.
An hour on the A train.
To get here on time, I need to leave my house no later than an hour 45 before I have to get here, and that's cutting it close.
For an appointment, you leave your house an hour and 45 minutes.
And that's cutting it close.
Boy, you can. I used to live in New Paltz, New York.
Yeah, you could be there and back.
No, it took about an hour and a half. It was about an hour and a half commute. A lot of people commute an hour and a half in their automobiles. And it's distance, and you got mass transit. That's faster because it's going under the ground. You don't have to worry about traffic, right? Whether you have mass transit. But the trouble is when you get out, if you got mass transit, when you start going out from a node and you start going out, it gets further and further away from things out there, further and further out on the radius, right?
The good news is I have time to work on my legal materials.
On the train.
On the train.
Got to make sure you get a seat.
Oh, sure, but I know the tricks. I always sit in the back of the train.
Do you sit near the back of the train? You get there?
The last car, there's usually seats.
Do you ever have to grab a seat away from a little old lady or something in order?
So, yeah, usually I just knock it down.
Kick out their walker and that kind of, like
roller.
Like Woody Allen, you know, coming out of the movie thing, yeah. So you've been living out there all your life, is that it?
I lived in Brooklyn for the first 23 years, and then I've been there for the last, I guess, 10 years.
10 years, pretty long time.
Yeah,
that's good.
For some reason I thought it was 8.
And how did you come to be studying sociology? Every sociologist I've known, practically without exception, has been, well, if one could use the term, a little bit subversive. I've never met a sociologist I didn't like. Now maybe there are some.
There are a few.
Yeah.
There are a few. I came to sociology in an interesting way by fighting the war and fighting U.S. imperialism and fighting the capitalist system that's really behind the war.
Okay.
And I started thinking more and more about sociology.
Uh-huh.
So then I decided I wanted to study that and maybe get a career as a professor or...
That's a good gig. If you can get it as a professor, you can do your studies and everything. Maybe the world should be set up where everybody's a professor and everybody has tenure and everybody has all the easy way to upper middle class existence that a tenured professor has. That would be a standard by which we could operate if everybody was a professor of their own thing. I don't suppose that makes much sense. But you've been the family. Were you always, in a certain sense, anti-imperialistic, anti-United States capitalist system, that sort of thing, in the family, around the dinner table with the family and that sort of thing?
My parents, especially my father, was very very liberal in the American sense. Both my parents were very pro-worker, pro-labor, pro-union, and very anti the more egregious abuses of the capitalist system. But they weren't as radical as I am, though. But they planted the seed. I remember being a little boy, being 7, and this is right around 1981.
81 and you were 7.
Yeah.
You have to forgive me, man. There's a generation gap here, but okay.
I think there's
now,
a few generation gaps.
When you said the war, I was wondering, was that the Korean War or was that Vietnam? Was going the First, Second World War, but yeah, anyway, yeah.
So
okay.
I was 7, and this is right around the time when Reagan fired all of the air traffic controllers from the PATCO union.
Movement, yeah.
And I remember him up in arms and yelling there should be a general strike. And I remember arguing with him, saying that the air traffic controllers broke the law, Dad. They broke the law. And he was explaining that who does the law serve? Who does the law protect? Whenever it's for the working man, there's the law to use against him. But when does the law protect the little guy? And I kept saying, Dad, they broke the law. And for me, it was very simple. They broke the law. They were going to get in trouble.
You smoke a joint, you go broke the law. You know,
so he explained it's not that simple, that the system is much more complicated.
Yeah, that's interesting. Churchill once said the law can be an ass, or I don't know, maybe it was Victor Hugo, I'm not sure. But the thing is that it can be, like you say, you're going to, you know, the law is the rules by which are set up by the society. I guess it has to be in a certain sense, doesn't it? Because we've always had people who are in the catbird seat or in the ruling class, if we want to call it that, in every society, I guess. I don't know what it was like wandering and gathering a couple 100,000 years ago, but we've always had that. And you do, and so you've got people who are the class of leaders and so on. And the law does have to make sure, if it's going to stand, it has to make sure that it does protect the rights of those people against the masses. Don't you think? Isn't it an important part of the law to be a conservative anchor to the system?
The law, in my humble opinion,
yes,
under capitalism is basically a bludgeon to maintain the class rule of a small class of capitalists.
You would, that sounds like Marxism. You would count yourself a Marxist.
Yes, I would.
In terms of understanding. He was a great sociologist, I think. You know, and whether or not he was correct on the economic theory is another issue. We've talked about.
That's a different show we'll have to do.
That perhaps is. But it's a big question because there are hierarchies within everything. I mean, like, aren't there? Or are there? Or you would be in favor of something that's going to benefit the masses of the people, which are not well served by systems, nor, I think, through all of history have they been well served. The masses of the people, they've either been coerced or co-opted by the people who are, in a sense, running the show, from emperors of Rome to the kings to the financial guys now, whoever's running the show. And does it have to be that way, or could it be another way, or is there a vision that could encompass the whole of the human society in a way that is more just and more, maybe even in a sociological sense, efficient in terms of realizing full human potential of all 6 billion heading for 10?
Wow.
You think we're ready for a revolution? And is it possible to have universal justice, or is that just a chimera?
Well, it's certainly possible to be a lot closer to it.
Okay.
I don't know if you can ever have the, quote, perfect society, but we could do a hell of a lot better than this and create a more just, more egalitarian society where the wealth and resources are used to benefit everyone and not just the small ruling class of Wall Street elites and financiers and bankers.
As it's always been. Has it? Or has it? Is there
Well,
a golden era sometime when things were organized?
In the beginning, they have what Engels called primitive communism.
Okay.
And that's
in the beginning being what?
Prehistoric.
Yeah.
When the American Indians were still living in a form of primitive communism where they had no private property.
Right.
The land belonged to everyone.
Right.
And
they were embedded in nature and felt appreciation of nature, right?
So all man lived like that in the beginning, and then with the advent of agriculture and slavery, basically once man was able to produce a surplus of goods.
Yeah, like food, when you could plant a seed in the ground and not just gather what fell from the tree.
Then the people who could store that stuff up would then hire people to protect it, protect their wealth, and that's where the origin of classes. Once you had a surplus in wealth, when you basically could only eat enough to live, and that's all you had, you couldn't have classes. But once people could store up wealth, that's when the classes started.
Well, suppose you're in the Serengeti Plain 200,000 years ago and you're wandering around and you've got some kids in your clan within a tribe or something. You're wandering around and things are really pretty grim, I think. It would seem to me. A lot of the time we were prey of the cats. I mean, particularly the leopards did us in with regularity. They really did. They got
I saw that on the Flintstones too.
Yeah, well, no, it's true. They did.
I'm not
why
saying
wouldn't there be competition then for the guy with the biggest club in order to make sure his kids got the last of that carrion that they're eating and surviving
on? Well, the thing is, though, the thing is, man didn't survive because of competition. He survived because of cooperation.
That's a thesis.
Because if you look at a saber-toothed tiger or a mammoth, they're a lot bigger than a man. So,
much bigger.
So the only way we survived was through teamwork and cooperation.
Well, that's an assumption. That's Ashley Montague would take that
Well,
view.
I mean,
he would take that, and also the nuclear.
This has been studied.
The nuclear family made sense because we got such a long period after we had gestation, 9 months, and then we got a long period. You got to be 40 years old, and you're still not able to be self-sufficient in a society. You have a long nurturing period was essential to the biological structure of humanity. But there's always been, I don't know, you're trying to point, if you could, are you trying to recall an era of primordial, like Rousseau or something, or a state of nature that they were good, and then it's the societal institutions that evolved that corrupted man, or what, And do you think we're making progress along? And if we're making progress from 200,000 years ago, what has been the cause of the progress, and what's holding us up from making even more progress, or more significantly, making a qualitative transformation in the overall system that would be, in a certain sense, liberating in that
We've made
term?
some great progress in technology, with technological advancements, and with medicine, but the problem is these are controlled by the rich. These are controlled by a small class of multi-billionaires who don't use it to benefit everyone. They use it to enrich themselves.
Well, that's true. I think that's probably true, but
what I'd like to see is take all the good stuff we've made and use it in a more just, equitable manner. Not, for instance, if you have the cure to a disease, and it's worth it not to release it on the market because you'll make more money. Yeah. Capitalism says, sit on it, let millions of people die, and then release it. For example, the U.S. government sponsors burning of crops, or pays farmers not to grow.
The price right, and price controls and things. And
sure.
Huge
Well, there should be some sort of balance where the crops are protected and everyone has enough to eat. What I want to connect it to is basically we're discussing that the government serves the upper class.
It must.
It must. It ties into my case because here's a guy, I was arrested for giving a speech against Bush and the war. Well, what does that have to do with the upper class, and what does that have to do with capitalism? but it really has everything to do with capitalism. You know, when I was initially arrested, they said they arrested me because I had a small bullhorn. And they said I was using a bullhorn without a permit. So they charged me with that, and then they fabricated false charges, which you'll see later in the show.
We have a little tape of your arrest.
But
we've got the videotape.
I could talk about how the bullhorn permit's unconstitutional. I could talk about how the police violated my rights. But my case really has nothing to do with bullhorns or megaphones. It has to do with what I was saying through the megaphone.
Well, that's what you say. I don't think they would say that, would they? They wouldn't say we don't want to have the people to have the right to speak and criticize the government. They wouldn't take that stand. They would say you've broken an ordinance or you've broken a regulation. As you said to your dad, you broke the law. And they are the ones who are the upholders of the law.
Whether they admit that or not isn't the question. The question is objectively what's real. Because if I were in the park with a bullhorn giving a speech in favor of the war, in support of the police,
in New York City, you might have more people come down upon you, but not the police.
People would harass me and say you're out of your mind. But would the police come and arrest me? Probably not.
Well, that's an assumption. Don't know if they would or not. Because you're still breaking the law. Suppose the law is you can't have a bullhorn that's going to
It's not about the law.
Disturb the tranquility of the people having their picnic over there with their puppy dog and their cat. And they're disturbing the nap of the cat.
Harold, I sat through...
You know, they'll rationalize.
No, they won't rationalize.
Oh, they won't, okay.
Because the bullhorn ordinance is just a pretext for political repression.
Well, that's what you're making an assumption. That's a big assumption.
Well, it's not a big assumption.
Oh, you don't think it is?
I don't think so.
You don't think so? Okay.
I don't think so. I've witnessed 50 people arrested for using a bullhorn. During one of the arrests, a Republican was speaking, and he borrowed the bullhorn. And I didn't mind because it just made the debate more interesting.
He borrowed your bullhorn?
He spoke in front of the bullhorn, in front of the same
your
cops,
bullhorn.
my bullhorn.
And he was saying Ray Bush or something?
He was saying how Bush is the greatest man, he's going to fight the terrorists and make them safe. The police marched into the park, and they arrested all of the members of the No Police State Coalition, and he was on his merry way. He wasn't arrested. The police...
That is prima facie evidence of there being a prejudice along the lines which you're trying to assert as a major premise, right? But the major premises have to be tested in a certain sense, don't you think?
I'll test it the best I can, as much as I can.
It's important there be a rule of law.
The question is this. Right? The bullhorn permit serves no purpose. Don't take my word for it.
No,
take the Corporation Council.
Okay.
They just sent papers arguing against me. I said this bullhorn permit is unconstitutional because it makes it a crime to speak on a megaphone even if your voice is at a low volume, even if it's at a whisper. If you whispered the First Amendment, you could be arrested. How does that protect the public from anything? How is that harming the public in any way?
I don't know. What would be the rationale for such a thing?
Well, according...
What would be the rationale?
There is none.
They have to have some rationale.
Well,
Geoffrey, you're not going to get the straight answer from it. There will be what they call a rationale
The city's rationale
so you have to think
was...
it through that way.
The bullhorn permit
disturb the peace.
Has nothing to do with unreasonable noise. It's to protect pedestrians while crossing the street from being distracted.
I see.
And even someone whispering through a bullhorn could distract the pedestrian.
Has a pedestrian ever been distracted by somebody making a ruckus through a bullhorn in New York City and got hit by a car that they would have seen if they hadn't been distracted?
I've never heard of any.
You don't think so? I bet there have. I bet you could find somebody. Some old guy that was wandering around and he got distracted.
You're being devil's advocate,
Yes,
right?
Of course I am. And but what I'm trying to do, that's what they'll do. They'll take one thing and then they will make a law relative to that generic thing and then make that generic to everything, and it becomes absurd, but it also can be used to serve nefarious purposes of stifling free speech.
And that's why it was put in place in the first place.
That's your assumption. It was.
That's why it was put in place in the first place. This ordinance, I traced back the history of this ordinance.
You did? Okay.
To 1937. It may go back further, but I've found it to 1937. It's right next to the ordinance that says at every rally you have to have an American flag. 3 feet by 5 feet.
Is that what it said in 1937?
Well, up until the 60s, that was the ordinance. My friend tells me he remembers getting in trouble for that.
Mm-hmm.
It's right next to the same ordinance that says you cannot have a red flag displayed in New York City.
A red flag.
And you cannot display a black flag in New York City.
That's anarchy and communism.
And you cannot display any flag or banner that speaks out against the government.
Well, that's absurd. You see them all the time. You ever see them marching down Fifth Avenue with banners as high as you can see? And it happens all the time.
Well, this is 1937.
Oh, 37.
So
really?
this is where this ordinance came from.
But there were banners then. You see marches and things that were going on then.
A lot of people were arrested. Those ordinances were used as an excuse to lock people up.
Uh-huh.
The only difference...
does the system have to protect itself against the unwashed masses?
Well, why should it? Why should it have to?
I don't know.
Why should there be unwashed masses?
Well, that's another issue, isn't it? That's another issue, yeah.
And that's what they were doing when they arrested me.
Mm-hmm.
They have their bullhorn ordinance, which is a pretext for political repression. My case has nothing to do with bullhorns, nothing to do with sound permits. It has everything to do with political repression.
Okay, I'm sure that it is, but you didn't state it that way in the papers. It isn't stated that way, I'm sure.
That's the clever thing about the United States.
They will use subterfuge to do it, and guile.
Exactly.
And
while another country,
they couldn't walk on the grass.
Another country, exactly.
Oh.
A pretext, I like your term, a subterfuge, a guise.
Mm-hmm.
That's the difference between the United States and other countries. A more overt police state.
Yeah, there are lots of places, a real police state.
Where
they wouldn't stand on a ceremony, they'd just hit you upside the head.
Where they would arrest you for speaking out against the government.
Yeah,
and there'd be a law in the books speaking out against the government.
Put you broke the law.
And you broke the law.
Yeah.
While this society has to pretend to be a democracy, it holds out to the world that it's a democracy, but in reality it preaches democracy, but it practices dictatorship. Dictatorship.
Yeah, that's a stronger word than plutocracy.
If you speak out against the government, they have a guise or a pretext or subterfuge to arrest you, to charge you. The charge likely will have nothing to do with political repression. It'll be some sort of offense.
That's what I was saying.
Disorderly conduct, resisting arrest.
Disturbing the peace.
Disturbing the peace,
Right.
using a bullhorn without a permit.
Right.
But it's just a mask to hide political repression. And that's what my case has everything to do with. And the New York City police force are the domestic occupying army. That's what they are. They're there to maintain the rule of this financial elite, and they arrested me because I was speaking out against the war and the financial interests of that ruling elite.
But you don't want to have some sort of a mob scene where the mass can go in and seize the assets and property and so forth of the people who are well-to-do. You've got to protect you against that sort of a thing, don't you think? Don't they have to be protected in terms of a legal framework has to have a large element of one that serves and vouchsafes the interests of those who are the leaders and the wealthy in that society. That's one of the cornerstones of what's needed in a republic.
The state, the purpose of the state is
keep
to
order.
I believe this is either Engels or Lenin. Organized bodies of armed men that protect the property and the interests of the ruling class.
Well, that would be the way Marx would see it, as one part. But
so the police are there to make sure the rich stay on top and the poor stay on the bottom.
I don't think it's fair to say that as a singular thing. That's one thing that they do, and keep
an fundamentally, that's what they do.
That's one aspect of it, but
that's the fundamental aspect.
But they also have to keep law and order, and they have to keep security of the people. And you don't want mass riots and people. You don't want rule by the mob. You don't want terror where people are just running loose. You got the police keep the order. And haven't you seen all the programs on television where the police are the good guys? And they're out to capture all the bad guys.
Why is that? Why did the police get portrayed?
Ever see Walker on television?
That's Chuck Norris?
Yeah, and he's going out, and it's always the bad guy. And they go out and get the bad guy. They don't go out and get beat up on workers and so forth.
Marx called this the superstructure, the ideological cultural superstructure, where the thoughts and culture of people will be shaped by the media, shaped by culture, shaped by the education system, shaped by Hollywood, which is going to keep promoting the system's values.
Well,
pro-police, pro-private property, pro the individual, anti the worker, anti the collective.
Well, we had things like the Sherman Antitrust Act. We had all kinds of things that comes and flows back and forth. But one thing is you have to vouchsafe the system. against anarchy. I mean,
Well,
that would be
when
one of the
you're-
What is the purpose of a rule of law?
When
you
you
have to
say
have a rule of
anarchy,
law.
what you say anarchy is you're saying is challenging this sophisticated slave system. I'm saying we could do better than live under slavery.
You
and
don't
that's
like
what,
living
that's
under
what,
this slave
that's
system?
what, no, I don't.
You want to have it a little different? You want to
I
have,
want to make it
what do you want to
better.
have? Different slave masters? You want to have no slaves? You want to have a thing where there is a justice for everyone and
Sure.
that things are right and everything?
Mhm.
Do you think we're tending that way since the Serengeti Plain? Are things getting better or not?
Well, on paper,
I mean, in terms
it's
of
proven
everything.
they're getting much worse. The
You-
income disparity of New York City is one of the worst in the world.
I think income disparity between the very wealthy and the poor in New York is the worst city in the country now.
Maybe the world. I believe it's worse than most of Africa.
Worse than ever, like that, yeah?
It's the same as Namibia.
Really? Namibia.
I'm sorry.
Namibia. Namibia. That's it. You got to learn to enunciate. Right? No, but I mean, there's that kind of thing. But you do want a rule of law, and then within the rule of law, you have a thing called a constitution.
Police aren't interested in the rule of law. If they were interested in the rule of law, I would have never been arrested in the first place.
Well, the police are going to protect the citizens against the bad guy who's going to hit them on the head and steal their
They
purse.
don't protect the citizens.
No, but that's what
they protect the upper class.
Would you want? Well, yes, among others, but they protect and they are the ones who have the most to lose. The upper class have the most to lose, and the upper class. Is it wrong that the interests of the upper class be protected along with the interests of everybody else? Or if you serve the interests of the upper class,
shouldn't be an upper class.
You can't serve the interests of everyone if
Correct.
you're serving the interests of the upper class in your view.
Correct.
You have a class view of
Correct.
the Organization of World Society.
Correct.
All right, and you would like to see, and you would like to speak out against that. The injustice
yes, more
that
so now
exists.
than ever.
Now, more so now than ever. And it's more or less wrapped up in that. But I think the law has to have a reason to protect the interests of those who are, and then you have a system for changing it. You know, it's called get elected to Congress and propose an
Sure.
amendment and make a movement.
Sure.
But there's still a lot of ability for people. Martin Luther King gave that talk in '63. Abbie Hoffman, God bless him, he was not a good friend, but he was a friend of mine.
Every so-called democracy in the world is ruled by a coalition of several parties. Yet this society that claims to be the ultimate democracy can't have a third party. There's no third party here because the democracy is a farce.
It's called a vested, right.
It's a farce.
That's
where
right.
If the Democrats and Republicans are basically two wings of the same party.
There was a thing going on before you were born that was called the Cold War between a vision of...
I was weaned on the Cold War.
And they had a thing, and then they had a civil rights movement. And you had this thing. We're making progress. I mean, it used to be a whole lot worse. And I mean, the situation in the Depression was really terrible. The system came apart and people were starving to death. They were not just hungry, they were starving to death in this country of tremendous bounty and so forth. And there was a huge amount of action that would have brought a revolution to establish a socialist system where there was a distribution, an equitable distribution among all of the people so that it wouldn't all be hoarded in the hands of the few at the top. You would generally favor that, and you think that that kind of a system is what encourages things like imperialism and expansion of power and absurdities like the war in Iraq, and you were protesting.
It's not absurd to them.
And they think you arrested them because you were talking against that system.
Oh, there's no question in my mind.
That's what you were arrested for.
There's no question in my mind. That's why I was arrested.
Now we have laws, but they do have. I mean, Brian Becker and those guys. They answer these people. They put Uniting for Freedom and Justice. Martin King.
United for Peace and Justice.
They had and they can do it. And if they try to say, well, you can't do it because we have certain laws that have evolved from Magna Carta.
If Brian Becker or United for Peace and Justice would go to the park and give a speech, they would be arrested.
All right, but they do it all the time. They have demonstrations. They try to do it in a way.
And I support all of the rallies. I've been to every single one.
Have you? Good.
Basically.
Yeah. Okay.
I went to 2 recently in D.C.
Mm-hmm. And they're not prevented from doing that.
The drawback.
It's just that it's got to be orderly.
I was never being disorderly.
No, I know.
At no point was I ever disorderly. At no point did I do anything violent. I was in the park speaking, and I'm not going to take a defensive posture on that. And I don't believe that's being unreasonable. I believe we have a right to speak in the park against the government. I believe that's what freedom of speech shall not be abridged. The term abridged doesn't mean repressed. It doesn't mean silenced. The term abridged means shortened. Shortened. The freedom of speech shall not be shortened. That's much stronger than repressed or silenced or manhandled. Freedom of speech shall not be abridged. It means what it says, and it says what it means. That means you have the right to go to a park, a public sphere, and speak your opinion. I wasn't disturbing anyone. I sat through a 9-day jury trial, and not one cop said I was disturbing anyone.
They didn't bring that up?
Not one, exactly.
What did they bring up in the trial?
They said I didn't have a permit, and
All
they
right,
said...
there, you broke the law. Why didn't you get a permit?
But
they broke the law.
There's no, and I didn't, well, I did have a permit. The First Amendment was my permit. But there's no legitimate basis. Other than not having a permit, I wasn't doing anything to harm anyone. No one was being harmed by my actions.
Well, I can drive a car without a license, but I say I didn't need a license. God told me I can drive a car.
That's an interesting debate.
I mean,
that's an interesting debate. But it's irrelevant because the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances.
I can see loopholes peacefully.
And I was peaceful. They didn't accuse me of being belligerent or aggressive. They didn't accuse me of anything. The only thing I did wrong was I didn't have a piece of paper saying I have the right to speak.
That's what you object to. It's a local ordinance thing or something like that, or a way in which locally the government is originally... Then you got... Suppose you're living in a place where there's only 15 people and you're on 10 square miles. There's lots of room. You don't have to worry about abridging anything. But if you're living in a place with a lot of people closely packed, then they're going to set up local laws and things. You cross with the red light. And they set up these local laws in order to keep the thing orderly going. You know?
That protect people. Nothing was disorderly. There are millions of people in New York City talking, walking, having debates and discussions. But the minute you speak out publicly against the system, suddenly then they have all these...
If you went and stood on the corner or in the park where you were and just started talking without a bullhorn, they wouldn't have bothered you?
Well, not necessarily.
You're another person going around because people walk around all the time
I've been threatened with arrest by the police when I didn't even have a bullhorn. So
and what would they say?
They would say I was blocking pedestrian traffic. They'd say I was being disorderly. I was flailing my arms. I was being. They'll say I was yelling and screaming and creating unreasonable noise. They would say that I was inciting a riot. They'd make up lies, and we're going to see it. Maybe we should look at it right now.
Okay, that's good. That's good. That's good. We'll talk about that. That's good because you have a piece. You would set it up for us as it would.
We're going to see a piece from August 29th, 2004, the first day of the big, well, it was right during the protest against the Republican National Convention.
Oh, boy. That's the one where we couldn't go in Central Park because they're going to trample the grass.
They wouldn't let us go in Central Park because that would hurt the grass.
Fetched, wasn't it? I think that was like a rationale or a rationalization of
a pretense
of a political stand.
A pretext.
In order not to set up a situation. Do you remember?
The Metropolitan Opera.
You weren't old enough to remember '82 when there were 1 million people in Central Park. You weren't old enough, right?
I remember some big, great lawn.
Literally 1 million people. And Geoffrey.
No nukes.
Yeah, it was against when they were going to put the strategic, the missiles. Reagan put them into Europe, and they were going to pressure the Soviet Union. And Jonathan Shell, speaking of the freedom of the press, and he wrote that fantastic book, The Fate of the Earth, which is just a great book, a Bible. And they filled Central Park to the overflowing with over 1 million, literally 1 million people. It was amazing. But they were able to do it. And they didn't stop them from doing it.
Sure.
I don't know what happened to the grass. It seems to have survived from that. But anyway, I see what you're doing. But there was this thing now that's going on.
So there was just a big march, and the march ended, and then I went to Union Square, and that's where the march was ending. And then I took out a little megaphone and was giving a little speech.
And this Union Square. Okay.
Union Square Park, in the southern end of Union Square
Were
Park.
other people doing the same or not?
Most people were just standing around and listening.
It would get. Suppose you had a megaphone on every corner, And then people, I've got a megaphone, you got a megaphone, there'll be dueling megaphones.
What if people in every corner spoke without a megaphone?
They have the Hyde Park corner in England, you know, where you can put up a soapbox and talk whatever
Right
you
now,
want.
anyone in theory could speak without a megaphone, and no one does.
MNN is like a megaphone.
And no one does.
MNN is like a Hyde Park corner. Anybody can
You
come
know
in here
what?
and talk,
You know what
even
it
stuff
would
like
be.
I'm talking.
You know what
can
it would be if
stuff.
everyone had a megaphone.
What would it be like? It'd be cacophony.
It would be democracy,
and
that's what they're afraid of.
Oh, right.
That's what they're afraid of, because besides
Yeah.
MNN, which is a very small part of the media,
Yeah, yeah.
the same rich people who benefit from this war own all the media, control the media. You'll never hear my opinions on the mainstream media, on the corporate media or the capitalist media.
Yeah,
You'll never hear it.
You don't hear that? You don't think you do? No,
I've never heard it. I've never heard an anti-war stance that's
you hear it on
fundamental.
public access. You hear it on public.
You'll hear it on
Ralph
public
Shulman,
access. You'll hear it on WBAI.
BAI.
You won't
Amy
hear
Goodman will bring that up. And she's getting
not
out
so
500
much.
places and everything
Not
like
so
that.
much. She a little bit.
Danny Schechter does great stuff. There are people. Bill Moyers does great stuff.
You won't hear a fundamental criticism of capitalism and U.S. imperialism on Moyers.
No.
I mean, I don't really listen, but from what I know, you wouldn't hear. It wouldn't be that the war is about spreading U.S. hegemony, U.S. imperialism, and it's inherent to this system. And until this system is abolished, we'll continue to have war, we'll continue to have poverty, we'll continue to have a police state apparatus.
That's a radical tradition that Bill Kunstler was in, God bless him.
And radical comes from the word radical comes from the word rad, which means root.
Right, go to the root.
Go to the root. Interested in the root of the problem, the fundamental aspects of the problem, not the surfaces. Not, oh, well, we need a strategic redeployment. No, we don't need a redeployment. We need the U.S. out of there and get the U.S. out of here.
Yeah. And then also address the reasons that these inequities and these things exist, and is it possible to have a vision of a more appropriately, and use the term just, and it could also maybe be in the history of the evolution of events and everything like that. You get to a point where you have such a capability that it's not only unjust, the system. I saw Mr. President Carter the other day, and somebody asked him, "Do we live in a..."
You should interview him on your show.
I would love to. I have great.
On his new book.
I would love to. I would love to very much. But and somebody asked him, "Do we live in a just world?" And he said, "Of course not." Now, that's an interesting thing. But more importantly is the trend, or are the trend lines that the evolution of events is going, is it becoming more just, more unjust through time? And is there a point where, is it a chimera to think that we can ever have real justice, because human nature is such that there's going to be competition among people who always want to do, that kind of thing.
You have an interesting breakdown. Are we becoming more just? Are we becoming less just? It's complicated.
What's the trend?
But I'm not sure how to answer that.
Yeah,
but I do know something a philosopher once said. I don't remember his name.
Groucho Marx.
He said, as the evil in the world increases and bolsters and becomes greater, at the same time, the goodness in the world also increases to counter it.
You've got the evil over the justice. Which is more? Is there more of it? And what's the trend? Are we making progress?
We've had a civil rights movement that ended segregation.
Right.
De jure segregation.
They had chattel slavery.
But now we have worse segregation today than Brown versus Board of Ed. So, and now it's more hidden. Now it's more hidden behind socioeconomic factors. So we should go to the tape, though, because...
Oh, you want to go to the tape of you in the park when they're going to arrest you?
Yes.
Okay, we more or less...
And what am I saying?
What are you saying?
The U.S. government is the most hostile force against democracy.
Hostile force
The most hostile force against democracy. The U.S. isn't importing democracy. It's not exporting democracy. It's not spreading democracy. It's spreading the interests of Wall Street, ExxonMobil, Texaco, Halliburton, Unocal, Bechtel, and Lockheed Martin, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what the war is about.
This program is going to be followed this week by David Corton, who says corporations rule the world.
Well, they do. Power, They do, and I would like to see that change.
But Archer Daniel Midland and Mobil, they come on and say what great things they're doing to help humanity. Who's right?
The first guy you
David
mentioned.
Court. Now, you see that. That's apparently your assumption. Okay, well then, but you were arrested, and the point, is there a point to be made before we look at the tape? It's about 4 minutes or so?
Not only was I arrested, the police fabricated false charges against me. Now, what should surprise the viewers is that that's not the first time they've done that. In fact, they always do that. They always do that. And the police completely lied. And when we went on trial, the police got caught in the lies. None of them is in trouble. None of them are in trouble. But I'm in trouble. And they compounded the lies on the initial police complaint with felony perjury, lies on the stand. Not one cop was investigated for this. Not one cop was indicted for this. And the district attorney isn't there to prosecute the police. The district attorney is there to prosecute us. And that's the point I'm trying to make. This is about political repression. And we'll see the way they hide it. Because if you people out there, if you were to watch this video and we were to tell you this is footage we smuggled out of Iran, people would say, oh, well, of course you have no freedom of speech. They're Islamic fundamentalist state.
Fascists,
But the minute I show it to you and it's here, suddenly we don't see it that way. We say, oh, well, but if I said this was Iran, North Korea, Cuba, you would say, oh, well, of course, of course. And if I had a representative from Iran explain, oh, the person didn't have a permit, you'd laugh in his face. You'd say, baloney, that permit is nothing but a guise for political repression.
So you've put the audience in the right mind to view this clip now, I think, don't you?
Yes, I have.
I think it's time for us to see if we can't set that clip up. We're talking with Geoffrey Blank, founder, president of the No Police State Coalition. A good idea, it seems to me. And if we could set it up and run that tape now, then please. Thank you very much. So I hope it gets going, the tape. Oh, there it goes. Okay.
The New York Police Department relies on this unconstitutional permit ordinance as a pretense to arrest political speakers like Geoffrey. Robert Morgenthau, the New York County District Attorney, and the NYPD have trumped up numerous false charges. Geoffrey has always maintained that he is innocent of these charges, and the most compelling evidence of this can be found in this footage. Upon first examination, there may seem to be nothing out of the ordinary. When you compare the events in this video to details of the police report from Geoffrey's arrest that day, a much different picture emerges. Geoffrey was charged with a long list of offenses, including inciting to riot, which is defined as urging 10 or more people to engage in tumultuous and violent conduct. Let's look again at the first frames of our footage. It is clear from these images that from the moment he is approached by Deputy Inspector Paul McCormick, commanding officer of the 13th Precinct, Geoffrey is calm and cooperative. The supporting deposition of arresting officer Paul Dunn says that at the time of Geoffrey's arrest, Geoffrey stated in substance to a crowd of approximately 75 people such things as, "This is our park," and "Get the cops." The report further states that this caused more than 10 individuals to begin pushing and shoving police officers, but the video evidence clearly shows that none of these things happened. Geoffrey is not making incendiary statements to the crowd, and people are not shoving the police. Geoffrey was charged with resisting arrest and 2 counts of disorderly conduct, which is defined as engaging in violent, tumultuous, and threatening behavior. Resisting arrest is defined as attempting to prevent a police officer from making an authorized arrest. At this frame, Geoffrey's hands are still free, and he is calm and cooperative. At this frame, the officer on the right of the screen begins to handcuff Geoffrey, and again Geoffrey offers them no resistance. The supporting deposition of Officer Paul Dunn tells a much different story than the one we are seeing on our screen. Officer Dunn's report claims that at the time of the arrest, Geoffrey flailed his arms, tried to turn away his body, and refused to put his arms behind his back. Once again, our video evidence shows that none of these things really happened, and none of these statements in Officer Dunn's report are true. With so many eyewitnesses and so many cameras focused on the events of that day, one has to wonder why Officer Dunn would make such brazen misrepresentations in his report regarding the events that happened during Geoffrey's arrest. Making false statements in an arrest report is punishable as a Class A misdemeanor. With such a preponderance of evidence to contradict the events detailed in Officer Dunn's report, it would seem by making those statements, he puts himself in harm's way of prosecution. One has to wonder if Officer Dunn has some personal vendetta against Geoffrey, that he'll be willing to risk his own freedom and career record to wrongfully accuse Geoffrey of crimes he did not commit. Or could it be that Officer Dunn is only following orders from higher up, knowing that in doing so, he would likely be protected by the same higher-ups should the truth of his perjury come to light?
Oh, that's really interesting. It's just all those things they made up, right?
Sure.
Maybe it's just a form they have, a Bloomberg form, like where you have all those things written into the indictment and everything, whether
Sure.
you did it or not. They almost it's that way you see, and is any of that able to be brought up if you have legal counsel? And we want to get to the fact that Lynn Stewart, God bless her, is going to be talking at a rally in your support and so forth, and the memory of William Kunstler and the memory of the people who have fought against no state police, no
police state.
Police state kind of thing is there. But if a lawyer, can he bring that up and say this is false? Now you have a videotape, you can show that it is. Do they allow it? Is it admissible to allow it? And what are the situation? How hampered are the legal people who want to bring the kind of thing that you just brought on television here to bear in terms of what happens within the judicial system?
The law allows people to present evidence, and the main point for showing this, though, isn't so much about me, though. I'm showing this because I'm trying to indict the system.
Right, I understand.
Because we argued back and forth about the bullhorn permit. Just use your common sense. Why are the police marching into this park 100 strong in riot gear to arrest someone for not having a sound permit for a little megaphone?
All right.
When I look at that, it's pretty obvious what that is to me. It's political repression, just like any other dictatorship. And the only difference is they are better at hiding it with the permit technicality.
In trumped up language.
And then on top of that, the trumped up language, to make matters even worse and to show you, see, the point is this: what happened to me wasn't the exception, it's the rule. This happened to 2,000 people during the Republican convention. This has happened to
they locked them up
thousands.
on the west side for a long time.
I went there too, Pier 57.
Yeah, right.
To a toxic waste dump. And the only crime we committed, well, we didn't commit any crime, but what we were doing was speaking out against the system.
Right.
So I'm trying to show that this is political repression, and we need to call it what it is. And the police aren't here to protect us. They're here to repress us. When that same cop who made up all those lies got on the witness stand, this is what he said when the prosecutor asked him. Yes, this is a police officer, Paul Dunn. Yes, we tried to pull the defendant down from the milk crate, at which time he refuses. I take one arm, my partner takes the other arm, at which time a struggle ensues, and we ended up wrestling, going onto the floor, at which time the defendant had his arms underneath his body, flailing his arms, kicking his legs, refusing to be placed under arrest.
Now, your tape is not edited. You haven't edited things
Not
out.
at all.
I didn't see that in the tape.
You didn't see it
I
because it
see
didn't happen.
Well, they could say the same thing. I did see Rodney King being beaten the bejesus out of, and it was on the tape, and that got into the public consciousness. So what's the status of that? Can they say that can't be admitted because it's not what really happened, and what Officer Dunn said happened?
It was admitted.
It was admitted?
Well,
then what do they say in the face of the fact that here's the videotape?
The cops caught in the lie. I then questioned him, and then he said, when we tried to take the defendant by his arms to try to pull him off the milk crate, he would swing his arms like this, and we had to wrestle him to the floor, at which time he kept his arms under his body. He was kicking his feet, at which time his shoe flew off. We had to wrestle him to get his hands behind his back. And then I even give the guy a chance. I said, isn't it a fact that another police officer approached the accused and walked the accused over to you, and that's the first time you had any interaction with the accused? No. Isn't it a fact that Deputy Inspector Paul McCormick actually approached the accused, that being me, and walked him from the milk crate over to you, and that's where you placed me under arrest? No. And he keeps denying it, I'm giving him a chance, a way out.
Yeah.
The moral of the story is this. When you lie under oath, obviously he's lying.
He said there was a misdemeanor to lie within a deposition.
On the deposition, it's a misdemeanor. When you lie under oath, it's a felony. It's a felony.
That's what happened to Mr. Clinton.
The moral of the story.
The impeachment thing.
The moral of the story is police officer Dunn not only wasn't indicted, not only didn't get in trouble, wasn't investigated at all. The DA protected him because that's the DA's role.
Well, that's the blue line. They're going to protect their own. It's like
course.
Soldiers fight their own. Or,
of course.
Or mafia soldiers
the courts,
protect each other.
the judge did nothing to see that justice was served. The district attorney did nothing to see that justice is served because they all, the police, the courts, the district attorney are there for one reason, to repress the people.
Well, that's your assumption, right? Okay,
well,
now
I've got piles of evidence.
I know, and that's good, and you're going to bring it up, and it's going to be brought up at the meeting on the 13th, which is going to be just the end of this week.
We should tell people. We should tell people about the 13th.
But I wanted to bring up something else, though. Is the
when and the where.
I know. Do you ever see the movie Rashomon?
No, sir.
Familiar with Rashomon?
No.
Classic
No,
Kurosawa movie. And it's a thing where there is a scene out of the 16th century or something in Japan, and there's three people involved. There's a bandit, a married couple or something, and the thing is seen from the standpoint of the different people, and they see what happened, or they describe what happened in the film. They describe what happens, and what they saw happen was completely different. Each and every one of them was completely different according to the perspective, like Heidegger or something, or like, the way you observe
this isn't the case of
but they're going to see
everyone
things,
holding a different elephant.
In his head, he thought you were flailing around.
No, those are bold-faced lies.
But I'm trying to make a point. Now, you're trying to make a point that he's lying. And everybody in Rashomon thought the other was lying because they saw things differently. And that happens in
what you're talking about, what you're talking about is we both witness a crime, and you say, yeah, the witness was 6'3". I say, yeah, the witness was 5'3".
Yeah, right. See,
okay,
right.
He's describing in detail a fight on the floor, rolling around, that never happened.
What I'm trying to tell you, being of a persuasion that things are getting, things are progressing and so forth, when you've got a videotape, and you play the videotape, if we could have the videotape brought in the judicial process more than other, and he says you were flailing around and you're standing there peaceable, you've got the tape. What do the people who are trying to maintain the perception that, let's give them the benefit of the doubt, that was the perception, Rashomon-like, that was the perception, but when you got the videotape, is it able to be introduced increasingly into the judicial process as a way of trying to validate the rights of one or any of the parties involved toward truth?
Usually videos are admissible evidence.
That's good.
And this was admitted in my case and helped me get some of the charges against me dismissed.
What did they say?
The cops then lied and said that tape is from a different day.
They tried to do that. So then they made it so
way.
there would have to be rules of evidence in order to bring that in. It takes time to do it. But that was, and it seems to me you've got a very good case with that tape and so forth, and that should be introduced. And you've got good legal counsel that can argue the law and argue the responsibility of the lawyers to protect the right of free speech and so forth.
But it's not simply about me, though.
No, I know that.
It's about, this is endemic to the system.
Right.
This is happening all the time, every time.
Rodney King. That was happening all the time, and then they got it on videotape, and then there were consequences. Okay? Now, it might lead
Well,
to...
the justice didn't happen in the court, though. The justice happened
in the court
the
of public
streets.
opinion. And in
When the
street.
people
Yeah,
revolted.
That's right. That's right. Or Mr. King didn't have to give his speech. Or Malcolm X didn't have to give his speech about let's do, you know, that kind of stuff that's going to incite people to do something other than what's conservatively there to be protected.
What I'd like to do,
but it's a really
what I'd
important
like to
issue.
do, and I'm not making that many friends.
You're
in
not
this,
making friends? No.
Is we need to look
got a
at the
lot of
police.
friends.
Well, I don't have many friends in high places.
Oh, I
have
see.
lots of enemies in high places.
It would be better. You'd be better if you had a lot of friends in high places, and you would be better off if you had a lot of money to hire a very smart, smooth-talking lawyer, right?
I'm in good shape right now.
Okay, good.
I just submitted papers that may lead to the whole case being thrown out.
That would be a good thing, because as it stands now, you actually face possibly a couple of years. You got a sentence coming up on
I
the
was
30th.
sentenced I was convicted of 2 charges of resisting arrest and using a bullhorn.
They were resisting arrest.
Correct.
You were able to enter the videotape and
I got that one dismissed. 2 other cases where I didn't have a video, or the video at one point panned away, and the cop said, "Oh, that's when he pushed me. Oh, that's when he resisted." So I'm calm.
Better videographers.
I understand. I don't go anywhere now without 3 video cameras from every angle.
Right. Okay.
Because I understand how they'll lie.
Well, it's good.
And
we've
they'll
got that.
lie, and then they'll lie, and then they'll lie, and the DA and the judge will protect them. And the only reason there was an indictment in the Sean Bell incident is because there was so much public outrage. Because there were plenty of young men gunned down like dogs.
Yeah.
They weren't even indicted.
Right.
Timothy Stansbury.
Well.
I'm excited about next Friday.
Yeah, next Friday.
Well,
that
this
would be,
Friday
it would
when
be this
people
Friday.
watch this
it's
show.
The 13th.
This
at,
13th.
At the Judson Church, right?
At the Judson Memorial Church in the Assembly Hall. Now that's on 239 Thompson Street.
Yeah, that's right on...
Do we have a screen
Washington,
for that?
What?
Do we have a screen?
No, we don't.
Okay.
But it's going. Everybody knows the Judson Church. A lot of people do. It's right on the south side of Washington Square Park.
My
right
event's going to be in the Assembly Hall, which is in 239 Thompson Street.
That's right off the main street. That's right.
Exactly.
Facing
Between
right
Washington Square Park South and West 4th. Take the A, the C, the E, the B, the D, the F to West 4th Street Station, and get out at the bottom, the southern part of the station. You're right at West 4th Street,
and
West 3rd Street.
Give the street address for those that are going to arrive by limousine, okay?
For those who come by limousine, 239 Thompson Street.
Thank you.
And if you need more directions, call the No Police State at 718-945-1177.
Yeah, and among others, Lynn Stewart's going to be there.
Lynn Stewart's
in support of your case, because your case is relevant to maintaining the avenues toward freedom of speech on political or other issues, right?
Exactly.
An important issue. Well, it's very good. Lynn's beautiful, and I hope she's also got herself in some trouble with the law and so forth.
She's fighting.